I posted a video. Hours later, I saw him through the window. I thought the smudge on my monitor was just a glare from the streetlights. You know, that kind of oily, rainbow-colored streak that happens when you haven't cleaned your screen in a week and the light hits it at just the right angle. That's what I told myself. It was 2:14 a.m. in Seattle, and the rain was doing that thing where it doesn't really fall so much as it just hangs in the air, turning the world into a gray, blurred mess. I was sitting in my third-floor walk-up, a place that always smelled faintly of damp wood and the burnt toast aroma of my overclocked PC. My name is Elias. I'm 26, and I spend about 16 hours a day staring at a high-resolution glow. I'm a freelance video editor, which is just a fancy way of saying I piece together other people's lives for a living while mine sits on a shelf gathering dust. That night, I was desperate. The rent was due in 3 days, and my bank account was looking like a ghost town. I had spent the last 12 hours cutting together a day-in-the-life vlog for my own channel, hoping to catch some of that sweet, elusive algorithm luck. It was mundane stuff, me making coffee, me walking to the corner store, me sitting at this very desk editing. The irony of editing a video about me editing a video wasn't lost on me. It felt like a hall of mirrors, a digital loop that never ended. I was tired, my eyes were stinging from the blue light, and every muscle in my neck felt like it was made of rusted wire. Have you ever felt like you were being watched through your own screen? Like the lens of your webcam wasn't just a piece of glass, but an actual eye looking back at you? If you've ever had that prickle on the back of your neck while sitting alone in a dark room, hit that subscribe button. It helps me know I'm not the only one who's looked into the digital void and felt it looking back. Now, let me tell you how my life started to sync up with a nightmare I couldn't edit out. Living in Seattle teaches you a lot about shadows. The city is built on layers, with alleyways that never see the sun and brick buildings that seem to soak up the misery of 1,000 rainy winters. My apartment is small, cramped really. It's a studio where the kitchen is basically an extension of my workspace. I've lived here for 2 years, ever since my girlfriend and I broke up. She took the dog and the furniture that actually matched. I took the high-end monitors and the crushing silence. Since then, I've become something of a hermit. The gig economy doesn't require you to see people, just their files. I download their footage, I fix their mistakes, I upload the finished product, and I get paid in digital numbers that barely cover my electricity bill. The vlog I was working on was meant to be my breakout piece. I'd put everything into it. I used a 4K camera, high-end stabilizers, and I'd spent hours color grading the Seattle gray to look aesthetic rather than just depressing. Around 2:30 a.m., I was doing the final pass on a sequence where I'm sitting at my desk, talking to the camera about the struggles of being a creative in a tech-driven city. In the video, the window behind me is visible. It's a large, old-fashioned pane that looks out over the alleyway between my building and the brick warehouse next door. As I scrubbed the playhead back and forth through the timeline, I saw it. A flicker. It was subtle, maybe only 3 frames long. A quick flash of white in the darkness of the window reflection. I paused the video. I zoomed in to 400%. The image became a mosaic of pixels, a grainy map of browns and blacks. There, in the upper right corner of the window frame, was a pale shape. I leaned closer to the monitor, my nose almost touching the glass. It looked like a face. Not a clear one, but the suggestion of one. 2 dark hollows for eyes and a long, thin smear where a mouth should be. Digital artifact, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, cracked from hours of disuse. I figured it was just a reflection of a LED street lamp or maybe a sensor glitch from the camera struggling with the low light. These things happen. Cameras aren't perfect, and neither is the human eye when it's been awake for 20 hours. I ignored it. I dragged the clip into the trash, replaced it with a slightly different angle where the window was obscured by my head, and hit the export button. While the computer whirred, its fans spinning like a jet engine to process the heavy 4K files, I got up to stretch. The apartment felt smaller than usual. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker, as if the darkness was a physical weight pressing against the walls. I walked over to the actual window, the one from the video, and looked out. The alleyway was a pit of ink. The brick wall of the warehouse opposite me was slick with rain, reflecting the orange glow of a distant security light. There was no one there. No ladders, no fire escapes close enough for someone to stand on. Nothing but a 30-foot drop to the wet pavement below. I laughed at myself, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel very funny. I was letting the isolation get to me. That's what happens when your only social interaction is through a comments section. I went to the kitchen, poured the last of the lukewarm coffee into a mug, and waited for the progress bar on my screen to hit 100%. At 3 a.m. sharp, the notification pinged. Upload complete. I titled it The Reality of Solitude, added some tags, and hit publish. I felt a brief moment of satisfaction, that little hit of dopamine you get when you finish a long project. I figured I'd go to sleep, wake up around noon, and see if I'd manage to break 1,000 views. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft ambient glow of my keyboard and the standby lights of my speakers. I crawled into bed, which was tucked into an alcove just a few feet from my desk. The rain continued its rhythmic tapping against the glass. Tap, 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 tap. It was a soothing sound, usually. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't the irregular splashing of raindrops. It was deliberate. It sounded like a fingernail clicking against the pane. Click, 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 click. I froze. My heart began to thud against my ribs, a heavy, slow beat that echoed in my ears. I told myself it was the building settling. Old pipes, a branch from the one dying tree in the alley, anything but a person. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second. I had a notification from YouTube. New comment on The Reality of Solitude, 1 minute ago. I tapped it. My hands were shaking, just a little. The user's name was a string of random numbers. The comment read, 412. Look at the glass behind you. You missed a spot in the edit. A cold chill washed over me, the kind that starts at the base of your spine and turns your blood to slush. 412. The video was only 6 minutes long. I had checked every second of that footage. I had deleted the clip with the flicker. I knew I had. I scrambled out of bed and sat back down at the desk. My breath was coming in short, jagged gasps. I opened the live video on my channel and dragged the slider to the 4-minute and 12-second mark. In this shot, I was leaning forward, talking about how quiet the city gets at night. Behind me, the window was perfectly clear, and there, standing directly behind my chair in the reflection, was a man. He wasn't a blur this time. He was sharp. He was wearing a white mask, the kind of cheap plastic thing you find at a Halloween store. But it looked weathered, stained with something dark around the edges. He was standing so close to me in the video that he could have reached out and touched my hair. But in the footage, I didn't react. I just kept talking to the camera, completely oblivious to the person standing inches away from my back. I felt a wave of nausea. This was impossible. I had been alone. I had locked the door. I had checked the footage a dozen times. How did a 6-foot man in a mask stand in my tiny apartment without me noticing? And more importantly, how did he get into the final render after I'd deleted that specific clip? Then the audio from the video began to change. On the screen, the Elias in the vlog stopped talking mid-sentence. He didn't just stop. The audio cut to a low, distorted hum. It sounded like a microphone being dragged across gravel. Then, a new sound emerged from my speakers. It was a rhythmic tapping. Click, 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 click. It was perfectly synced with the sound I was hearing from the real window behind me. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep my eyes on the screen, as if the monitor was a shield that could protect me from the reality of the room. But the sound was getting louder. It wasn't just a tap anymore. It was a scratching, like something sharp was trying to find a way through the glass. I slowly, agonizingly, turned my head. The window was empty. The rain was still falling. The alley was still dark. But then I noticed something on the glass. It wasn't a smudge this time. It was a piece of tape. A small, square piece of silver duct tape stuck to the outside of the pane. And dangling from it, swinging gently in the wind, was a small plastic object. A micro SD card. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another comment from the same user. "Don't worry about the views, Elias. I've been watching the whole time. Check the alley." I looked down into the darkness of the alleyway, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. About 20 feet down, tucked into the recessed doorway of the warehouse, I saw a glow. It was a screen. A large flat-screen monitor had been set up on a rolling cart in the middle of the rain. It was playing my video, but it wasn't the version I had uploaded. On that screen in the alley, the man in the white mask wasn't standing behind me anymore. He was walking toward the camera. He was walking toward me. The man in the video reached out and grabbed the lens of the camera, his gloved hand obscuring the frame. The screen in the alley went black. Then, my computer monitor went black. The only light left in the room was the tiny blinking blue light of my router. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like it was filling up my lungs. I reached for the window latch, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal. I had to get that card. I had to know what was on it. But as I cracked the window open, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of rain or the city. It was the smell of ozone and old, unwashed clothes. The micro SD card was right there, just inches from my hand. I grabbed it, pulling it inside and slamming the window shut. I locked it, then checked the front door. Locked. I pushed my heavy dresser in front of the door, my breath coming in ragged sobs now. I sat back down at my desk, the small piece of plastic feeling like a hot coal in my palm. I knew I shouldn't plug it in. I knew that whatever was on this card was going to change everything. But in the world of an editor, the only way to deal with a mystery is to look at the footage. I pushed the card into the reader. My computer groaned as it recognized the new drive. There was only one folder. It was titled, "The Uncut Version." Inside were dozens of files. They were all dated. The first one was from 3 weeks ago. I clicked on it, my mouse hovering over the play button. The video opened. It was a shot of me. I was sleeping. The angle was from directly outside my window, looking in. The camera was perfectly still, mounted on something stable. In the video, I was tossing and turning, my face illuminated by the pale moonlight. Then, a figure entered the frame, the man in the white mask. He wasn't outside, he was inside the room. He was standing over my bed, holding a tablet. On the tablet screen, I could see a live feed of myself. He stayed there for 4 hours, just watching me sleep. I felt the air leave my room. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone for a long time. The man in the mask wasn't just a stalker. He was someone who lived in the gaps of my life. Someone who knew my schedule, my habits, and my deepest isolations. But that was just the beginning. I scrolled down to the most recent file, the one from tonight. The timestamp was 2:45 a.m., just after I'd finished the edit. I clicked play. The footage showed the back of my head as I sat at the desk. I could see myself on the screen, looking at the flicker in the window. The camera was positioned in the corner of the ceiling, hidden behind the vent. In the video, the man in the mask crawls out from the small access hatch in the ceiling, the one I'd always assumed led to a crawl space for the building's wiring. He drops down silently, landing right behind my chair. He stands there for several minutes, his masked face inches from the back of my neck. He reaches out a hand, hovering it just over my shoulder, as if he's contemplating touching me. Then he looks directly into the hidden camera and whispers something. I turned my volume up to the max, my ears straining against the static. "Great content, Elias," he whispered. "But the ending needs more blood." That's when the power in my apartment went out. Not a flicker, not a surge. Total, absolute darkness. And then I heard the hatch in the ceiling creak open. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical weight that settled over the room, thick and suffocating. In Seattle, the night is never truly black. There's always the amber glow of the street lamps, the flickering neon of a distant sign, or the dull gray of the overcast sky reflecting the city's heartbeat. But when the power cut, my apartment became a tomb. The hum of my PC, the steady whir of the cooling fans, the quiet buzz of the refrigerator. All of it vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by a silence so profound it made my ears ring. And then there was that sound. The creak of wood against wood. The hatch. I sat frozen in my ergonomic chair, the kind I'd spent $600 on because I spent my life in it. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, beating against my ribs with a violence that made my breath come in shallow, jagged stabs. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared up at the ceiling, where I knew the small square of plywood was being pushed aside. I've lived in this unit for 2 years, and I'd never once opened that hatch. I'd always assumed it was just an old access point for the plumbing or the crawl space that ran between the 3rd floor and the roof. Now I knew it was a doorway. I reached out, my hand trembling so badly I almost knocked over my cold coffee. I felt for my phone on the desk. My fingers brushed the cold glass, and I gripped it like a lifeline. I didn't turn on the flashlight yet. I was terrified that the light would act as a beacon, a target for whatever was coming through that hole. I just sat there in the dark, listening. Thud. A heavy, muffled sound. Someone had dropped from the hatch onto the hardwood floor of the small hallway that led to my bathroom. They were inside. The silence was the loudest part. It stretched out, second by agonizing second, as I waited for a footstep, a breath, a word. But there was nothing. Just the steady, indifferent rhythm of the rain hitting the window behind me. My mind was racing, trying to process the files I'd just seen on that micro SD card. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, someone had been living above me, watching me sleep, watching me work, watching me edit my own life while they prepared to end it. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated shame. How could I have been so blind? I'm an editor. My entire job is to notice the details, to catch the one-frame mistake, to sync the audio perfectly. And yet, I'd missed a man living in my own ceiling. I thumbed the side button on my phone. The screen flickered to life, the brightness set to the lowest level. But in the pitch black, it felt like a spotlight. 12% battery. The red icon blinked at me like a mocking eye. No signal. My Wi-Fi was down because the power was out, but my cellular data was gone too. I looked at the top bar. No service. He had a jammer. This wasn't just a break-in. It was a coordinated blackout. He had cut the cord to the outside world before he stepped into my room. I stood up, the springs of my chair giving a tiny metallic groan that sounded like a scream in the quiet. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from my desk, the only thing I had that could be considered a weapon. It was a stupid decorative thing, a solid orb of glass with a bubble trapped inside, but it felt heavy. It felt real. I began to back away from the desk, moving toward the kitchen area. My apartment is a studio, which means there are no walls to hide behind, no doors to lock once you're inside the main room. The only barrier was the dresser I'd pushed against the front door. I realized then, with a sickening jolt, that I had trapped myself. In my panic to keep the world out, I had ensured that I couldn't get out. I was locked in a 30-square-foot box with a man who had been studying me like a lab rat. I retreated into the kitchen corner, my back pressing against the cold tiles of the backsplash. I held the phone in one hand and the glass orb in the other. I finally worked up the courage to flick on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, a narrow cone of white light that danced across the room. I swung it toward the hallway. The hatch was wide open, a dark rectangular void in the white plaster of the ceiling. But the hallway was empty. There was no man in a white mask, no shadow. Just my discarded laundry pile and the open door to the bathroom. My heart slowed for a fraction of a second. Maybe he'd gone back up. Maybe he was waiting for me to climb up after him. Then I heard it. A sound coming from outside. It wasn't a tap this time. It was a hum. A low, mechanical vibration that seemed to be vibrating the very glass of the window. I turned the light toward the alleyway window. For a second, I saw my own reflection. Pale, wide-eyed, looking like a ghost. But beyond the glass, something was happening on the fire escape. A projector, a high-lumens professional-grade projector, was sitting on the metal grating of the fire escape, pointed directly at the wall of my apartment. It hummed into life, a brilliant beam of blue light hitting the white paint of my bedroom wall. I watched, paralyzed, as an image began to take shape. It was a video. It was my video. But it wasn't the vlog I'd uploaded. It was a live feed. The projection showed me, right now, standing in my kitchen, holding a phone and a glass paperweight. The camera angle was high, looking down from the corner where the ceiling met the wall. The same corner where the man had hidden the camera I'd seen in the micro SD files. I looked up at the corner and I saw it, a tiny pinhole lens embedded in the smoke detector. It had been there the whole time. On the wall, the projected version of me looked terrified. I watched myself turn my head, watched myself breathe, watched the light of my phone bounce off the walls. It was like watching a movie of my own death in real time. But then the projection changed. The Elias on the wall didn't move when I moved. He stayed still. He looked at the camera and smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was the smile of someone who had won. Then, the Elias in the projection reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. A long, serrated kitchen knife that I recognized instantly. It was the one from my own knife block, the one I'd used to cut a bagel yesterday morning. I looked at my kitchen counter. The knife block was empty. The silence was broken by a voice. It didn't come from the hallway. It didn't come from the hatch. It came from my own speakers. They were battery-powered, a high-end Bluetooth set I'd bought for editing. They shouldn't have been working with the power out, but the blue pairing light was solid. He was connected to them. "You're behind on the script, Elias," the voice said. It was distorted, ran through a modulator that made it sound like a chorus of whispering ghosts. "We're in the third act now. This is where the protagonist realizes he's just a supporting character." "Who are you?" I screamed. My voice sounded pathetic, a high-pitched waver that betrayed every ounce of my fear. "What do you want?" "I want the edit to be perfect," the voice whispered through the speakers. "You spend so much time fixing things, Elias, smoothing out the rough edges, hiding the truth behind filters and transitions. I'm just here to show the world the raw footage." A sudden, violent crash erupted from the window. The glass didn't just break, it exploded inward. The projector on the fire escape shifted, its beam swinging wildly, illuminating the rain-slicked bricks of the warehouse next door before settling back on my wall. A figure stepped through the broken frame. He was tall, dressed in a matte black tactical jumpsuit that seemed to swallow the light. And the mask. The white plastic face was even more terrifying in person. It had no expression, just those two hollow pits for eyes and a frozen, painted-on grimace. He held a small, handheld device in one hand, a remote maybe, and in the other he held my kitchen knife. I backed further into the corner, the glass paperweight feeling like a pebble in my hand. He didn't rush me. He moved with a slow, theatrical grace, stepping over the shards of glass on the floor. He looked at the projection on the wall, then back at me. "The lighting is wrong," he said, his voice now coming from behind the mask, muffled but clear. "You're too far to the left. Move to the mark, Elias." He pointed the knife toward a small X that had been taped to the floor in the center of the room. I hadn't noticed it before. It was black electrical tape, nearly invisible on the dark wood. He'd been in here while I was at the store. He'd marked the spot where I was supposed to die. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. It was the editor brain taking over. When you're staring at a screen for 10 hours, you stop seeing people and start seeing assets. You see frames, you see pacing, you see the logic of the cut. My life was being edited by a madman, and if I followed his direction, the scene would end exactly how he wanted it to. "I'm not moving," I said, my voice steadier now. "The scene is over. I'm calling the police." The man in the mask tilted his head, a bird-like gesture that was deeply unsettling. "With what signal? With what battery?" "You're out of time, Elias. The audience is waiting. Look at the comments." I looked down at my phone. The screen was still on, but the YouTube app had changed. It was showing a live stream, my live stream. The title was The Final Cut. There were 12,000 people watching. The chat was scrolling so fast I couldn't read the names. "Is this real?" "Look at the knife." This is the best ARG I've ever seen. Wait, is that Elias? He looks actually scared. They thought it was a show. They thought I was in on it. They were cheering for my execution because they thought it was content. The man in the mask took a step forward. They want the ending, Elias. Don't let your fans down. He lunged. I didn't think. I just threw. The glass paperweight caught him square in the chest, a solid thump that knocked the wind out of him. He stumbled back, the knife clattering to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I sprinted for the front door, my heart screaming in my ears. I reached the dresser and threw my entire weight against it, shoving it aside with a strength I didn't know I had. The wood groaned against the floor, a screeching sound that felt like it was tearing through my skull. I grabbed the doorknob, twisted it, and threw myself into the hallway. The hallway was pitch black. The emergency lights hadn't kicked in. I ran toward the stairs, my feet slapping against the carpet. I could hear him behind me. He wasn't running, he was walking. The slow, rhythmic sound of his boots was more terrifying than a sprint. It meant he wasn't worried. It meant he knew there was nowhere for me to go. I reached the stairwell and threw myself down the first flight, nearly tumbling over the railing. I hit the second floor landing and kept going. I had to get to the street. I had to get to the light. But as I reached the ground floor, I saw a blue flicker under the door to the lobby. I pushed the door open and stopped dead. The lobby was filled with screens. Every inch of the walls was covered in monitors, tablets, and phones, all of them wired together with a messy web of black cables. And every single one of them was playing the live stream. There were hundreds of me staring back, thousands of masks, a wall of digital eyes watching me fail to escape. And in the center of the room, sitting in the manager's chair, was another man. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was young, maybe 19, with a pale, acne-scarred face and a pair of high-end headphones around his neck. He was typing furiously on a laptop. He looked up at me, and he didn't look like a killer. He looked like a fan. "Hey, Elias," he said, a wide, manic grin spreading across his face. "We're trending. You're finally famous." Then the noises came back, the heavy footsteps from the stairs. The man in the mask had reached the bottom. I looked at the kid, then at the stairs, then at the wall of screens. I realized then that the mask wasn't the threat. The mask was just the actor. The real monster was the one behind the camera, the one who was turning my terror into a viral hit. And the worst part, he knew my name. He knew everything about me, because I'd given it to him, one upload at a time. Until I found the hidden file on his laptop, I didn't realize how deep the edit went. The blue light from the wall of monitors in the lobby didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like being swallowed by a cold, digital sea. I stood there, my chest heaving, the glass paperweight still clutched in my hand like a primitive relic in a room full of high-end weaponry. The kid in the manager's chair, the one with the acne and the $300 headphones, didn't even look scared. He looked at me with the kind of detached curiosity an editor has when they're looking at a particularly difficult frame. I wasn't a person to him. I was a file format. I was a series of pixels that needed to be color corrected before the final export. "You're making great time, Elias," the kid said, his fingers never leaving the keyboard. "The audience loves the lobby scene. The pacing is perfect. High stakes, high energy, very cinematic." I looked at the screens. Every single one was showing me. From the front, from the side, from the security camera I didn't know existed in the corner of the lobby ceiling. I saw my own face, pale and glistening with sweat, reflected back at me 100 times over. In the chat window on the main monitor, the numbers were climbing. 15,000 viewers, 20,000. The comments were a blur of LFG and "Is he gonna die?" and "Scripted but good." "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Why are you doing this?" The kid laughed, a short, dry sound that had no joy in it. "I told you, I'm a fan. I've been following your channel since you had 50 subscribers. You've got talent, man. Your transitions are clean, your color grading is top-notch. But your content? It's boring. Day in the life of an editor? Nobody cares. They want to see the editor under the knife. They want the final cut." I'm just giving the people what they want. I'm the director you never had. Behind me, the door to the stairwell creaked open. The man in the white mask stepped out. He was holding the long, serrated knife from my kitchen, the blade catching the blue light of the monitors. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his masked face tilted toward the wall of screens, as if he were admiring his own performance. I looked at the front door of the building, the heavy glass doors that led to the rain-slicked safety of the Seattle streets. I lunged for them, my shoulder hitting the handle with everything I had. Nothing. The door didn't even budge. I looked up at the magnetic lock at the top of the frame. The red light was solid. The kid had taken over the building's smart security system. I was trapped in a glass cage, and the whole world was watching. "Don't bother," the kid said, his eyes still glued to the screen. "I've got the whole grid on lockdown. Fire alarms, elevators, locks. It's all part of the production. You can't leave until the credits roll, Elias. That's the rule of the genre." I felt a wave of pure, cold despair. I was an editor. I knew how these stories ended. The protagonist always tries to run, always finds the doors locked, always ends up cornered. I was living out a trope designed by a 19-year-old who spent too much time on the dark web. I looked at the masked man. He was moving now, circling the lobby, staying just out of reach, making sure the cameras got his good side. "Why me?" I asked, backing away until my shoulders hit one of the monitors. The heat from the screen felt like a brand through my shirt. "There are thousands of vloggers, millions. Why did you pick me?" The kid finally looked away from the screen. His eyes were bloodshot, the dark circles under them suggesting he hadn't slept in days. "Because you were already alone, Elias. You did the hard part for me. You isolated yourself. You moved to a city where you don't know your neighbors. You work a job where you don't see your coworkers. You turned your life into a digital feed and you left the door wide open. I just walked through it." He turned the laptop toward me. "Look at this. This is your life for the last month." He opened a folder on the desktop. It wasn't just surveillance footage. It was a timeline, a professional editing suite, like the one I used every day. But it was filled with clips of me. Me at the grocery store. Me at the park. Me crying in my bed after a long day of work. But there was something else. A PDF file was open on the side of the screen. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the text. Scene 42. The lobby confrontation. Elias reaches the ground floor. He realizes the doors are locked. The director reveals the scope of the project. Elias experiences a moment of digital vertigo. It was a script. My life for the last 30 days hadn't been a series of choices. It had been a series of scenes. Every random person I'd bumped into, every glitch in my footage, every weird notification on my phone, it was all scripted. "You've been following the script perfectly, Elias," the kid said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Even the paperweight, I knew you'd grab it. It was the only heavy thing on your desk. I moved the stapler yesterday just to make sure." The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. The feeling of being content wasn't just a metaphor. I had been curated. I had been edited in real time. My sense of agency, my belief that I was the hero of my own story, was just an illusion maintained by a kid with a signal jammer and a masked actor. I looked at the masked man again. He was standing near the director, waiting for his next cue. He wasn't a monster. He was just a guy in a jumpsuit, probably getting paid in crypto to scare a lonely editor. But then, the tone of the room changed. A notification popped up on the kid's laptop. It was loud, a sharp digital chime that cut through the low hum of the servers. The kid's face went pale. He leaned in, his eyes widening as he read the message. "Wait," he whispered. "That's not right." "What?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What is it?" The kid didn't answer. He started typing frantically, his fingers blurring over the keys. "The bid. It just went up. Someone just tipped $50,000. "For what?" The kid looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He wasn't the director anymore. He was a kid who had lost control of his own machine. "The ending," he said. "They don't want the final cut anymore. They want the live leak. They're bidding on how he does it. He looked at the masked man. The masked man didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted, his hand tightening around the handle of the knife. "Stop the stream," I said, taking a step toward the desk. "Turn it off, right now." "I can't!" the kid screamed. "I'm locked out. Someone hijacked the admin privileges. They've taken over the building system through my own back door." The masked man started to walk toward us. He wasn't theatrical anymore. He wasn't posing for the cameras. His gait was fast, purposeful, and lethal. The actor had a new director now, and the script had been rewritten in a language the kid didn't understand. I didn't wait to see what the next scene was. I grabbed the laptop from the desk, ripping the cables out of the wall. The screens in the lobby flickered and died, one by one, plunging the room into a chaotic strobe light mess of blue and black. "What are you doing?" the kid yelled, reaching for the laptop. I shoved him aside and ran toward the back of the lobby, toward the small door that led to the basement. I knew this building. I'd lived here long enough to know where the manual overrides were. If the digital world was against me, I had to go analog. I threw myself through the basement door and slammed it shut, sliding the old-fashioned deadbolt into place. It was a heavy iron bolt, something the kid's smart system couldn't touch. I was in the dark again. The smell of moth and old concrete filled my nose. I could hear the masked man hitting the door from the other side. Thud, thud, thud. The wood was thick, but it wouldn't hold forever. I opened the laptop. The battery was at 4%. The screen glowed dimly, reflecting off the damp basement walls. I needed to find a way to stop the director cut device I'd seen in the logs. I needed to find where he'd plugged in his man-in-the-middle hacker box. I scrolled through the files on the desktop, my heart racing against the clock. I found a hidden folder labeled Backup Sensors. I opened it. It wasn't just my apartment. The folder was filled with feeds from every unit in the building. He hadn't just been watching me. He was watching everyone. He was turning the entire apartment complex into a reality show for the highest bidder. Then I found it. A file titled System Reset Code, TXT. I opened the file, but it was encrypted. I needed a password. Thud, thud, crack. The door was beginning to splinter. I looked around the basement, my flashlight beam jumping over old pipes and rusted boilers. In the corner I saw it. A small black box with a blinking red light, plugged directly into the main fiber optic line of the building. The man-in-the-middle device. Taped to the top of the box was a Polaroid. I picked it up, my hand shaking. It was a photo of me, but it wasn't from a surveillance camera. It was a selfie. It was me and my ex-girlfriend, taken on our first anniversary 3 years ago. On the back of the photo, in red ink, were the words, "You were always the best part of the edit." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a random fan. This wasn't a kid who liked my transitions. This was personal. I looked at the kid's laptop again. I looked at the username of the person who had just tipped $50,000. Clarisse 92. My ex-girlfriend's name. The door to the basement gave way with a deafening roar of splintering wood. The masked man stepped into the dark, the knife held low at his side. But he didn't attack. He just stood there, the light from the laptop illuminating the white plastic of his mask. "She wants to see you now, Elias," the man said. His voice wasn't modulated anymore. It was familiar. It was the voice of the guy she'd left me for. That's when the terror really set in. I wasn't being stalked by a stranger. I was being deleted by my own past. Everything changed when I saw the light of a second laptop turn on in the corner of the basement. I checked the footage one more time, and that's when I realized he'd been here before, long before the 3 weeks started. He'd been here since the day she left. The splintering wood of the basement door echoed like a gunshot in that cramped, damp space. I stood there, trapped between the rusted skeleton of a 1950s boiler and a wall of weeping concrete, watching the man in the white mask step into the dim, flickering light of the laptop. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He moved with the terrifying confidence of someone who had already seen the end of the movie. The knife in his hand, my knife, the one with the chipped handle I'd been meaning to replace, looked alien in this setting, a sharp silver tongue licking the shadows. But it was his voice that really broke me. When he spoke, the electronic distortion was gone, replaced by a flat Midwestern accent I recognized from a dozen awkward dinner parties and one very silent, moving day. It was Mark. The guy Clarice had started seeing before the ink on our lease was even dry. The guy who was just a coworker until he was the guy carrying her boxes out of our life. "She always said you were too obsessed with the screen, Elias," Mark said, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "She said you looked at the world like it was something to be cropped and filtered. You never really lived in the moment. So we decided to give you a moment you'd never forget. A moment so real, even you couldn't edit it." My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. I looked at the Polaroid in my hand, the one of me and Clarice, happy and oblivious. It felt like a relic from a different century. I realized then that my isolation over the last year hadn't been a slow, natural retreat. It had been a trap I'd helped build. I had spent so much time curating my online presence, so much time talking to a lens instead of a person, that I had become a ghost in my own life. And Mark and Clarice? They were just moving into the space I'd vacated. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was looking for a way out, my eyes darting toward the small, high window that led to the alleyway, but it was barred with rusted iron. The only way out was through him. "She's the executive producer, Elias," Mark said, taking a slow step forward. The mask made him look like a mannequin come to life, a void where a face should be. "She's the one who suggested the crawl space. She remembered you mentioning how the landlord never finished the wiring up there. She's the one who's been managing the bids. You'd be surprised what people will pay to see a real tragedy unfold in 4K. I felt a surge of white-hot anger cut through the terror. It was a familiar feeling, the same frustration I felt when a file corrupted or a hard drive crashed. It was the desire to fix the error, to overwrite the bad data. I looked at the man-in-the-middle device blinking on the floor. It was the heart of the system. It was what was feeding my life to the world. "The bid went up, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The kid upstairs said someone tipped 50,000. Is that what I'm worth to her? A down payment on a house in the suburbs?" Mark stopped. He tilted his head, the plastic grimace of the mask catching a glint of light. "It's not about the money, it's about the closure. You wouldn't let go, Elias. You kept posting. You kept being there, in her feed, in her notifications. This is the only way to make sure the edit is final." That's when the second laptop, the one tucked into the corner I hadn't noticed, whirred to life. The screen didn't show the lobby. It didn't show the basement. It showed my apartment, my bedroom. The camera was at eye level now, as if someone was sitting at my desk. And someone was. I leaned forward, squinting at the grainy low-res image. There was a man sitting in my chair. He was wearing my favorite gray hoodie, the one with the coffee stain on the sleeve. He was using my mouse. He was scrolling through my editing software. He had his back to the camera, but his hair was the same messy brown as mine. His shoulders were hunched in the exact same way mine were after a long night of work. It was a perfect duplicate. "What is that?" I gasped, the glass paperweight slipping from my sweat-slicked palm and hitting the concrete with a dull thud. "That's the replacement, Elias," Mark said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "While you've been running, while you've been creating content, we've been training him. He's been living in your crawl space for 3 months. He knows how you take your coffee. He knows your passwords. He knows the way you sigh when a render takes too long. To the world, to your subscribers, and even to the neighbors. You're still up there. You never left your desk." The psychological weight of it hit me like a physical blow. The digital squatter wasn't just a stalker. He was an understudy. I was being replaced in my own life, frame by frame. The livestream wasn't a snuff film, it was a transition. A long, slow crossfade from the real Elias to the one they could control. I looked back at the screen. The man in my chair turned around. He didn't have a face, or rather, he had a face that was being projected onto. He was wearing a smooth, featureless mask, and a small, high-powered projector mounted on the desk was beaming my face onto it. In the low light of the webcam, it looked perfect. It looked like me. The fake Elias looked into the camera and winked. "The audience doesn't care about the truth, Elias," Mark whispered, moving closer now, the knife raised. "They care about the story. And the story says you're a lonely, depressed editor who finally snapped and went off the grid. The new you. He's much more productive. He doesn't miss deadlines. He doesn't complain about the rent." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for my existence. If I died here, in this basement, no one would even know I was gone. The upload would continue. The comments would keep rolling in. The digital version of me would live on, a puppet controlled by the people who hated me most. I realized then that I had been looking at this all wrong. I was trying to escape the room, but I needed to escape the edit. I dove for the laptop on the floor, the one the director kid had been using. Mark lunged, the knife whistling through the air where my head had been a second before. I hit the concrete hard, my shoulder screaming in pain, but I grabbed the machine. "You can't stop it," Mark yelled, turning toward me, his movements becoming more frantic. "The stream is encrypted. The servers are offshore." "I don't need to stop the stream," I grunted, my fingers flying over the keys. I didn't look for the exit or the stop button. I looked for the source files. As an editor, I knew that every stream has a cache. Every live video is actually a few seconds behind reality. There's always a buffer. I found the directory for the building's smart home hub. The kid had been using it to control the lights and the locks, but he'd also been using it to sync the audio. I bypassed the admin lockout, not by hacking, but by using the forgot password feature. The security question was, "What was the name of your first pet?" I looked at Mark. He was standing over me now, the knife pointed at my throat. "Clarice set this up, didn't she?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It doesn't matter," Mark said. "She used her old password, didn't she? The one we used for the Netflix account." I typed in the name of the golden retriever she'd taken in the breakup. Buster 123. Access granted. I didn't unlock the doors. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the building's emergency broadcast system. Every modern apartment complex in Seattle has one. A series of high-decibel speakers in every hallway and every unit, designed for fire drills and earthquakes. I opened the live mic feature and dragged the input source from the laptop's internal microphone. "Mark," I said, my voice echoing not just in the basement, but in every room of the building. "If you're going to kill me, you should at least tell the audience why. Tell them about the house in the suburbs. Tell them how Clarice is watching from the car downstairs." Mark froze. The sound of his own name booming through the building seemed to shatter the theatricality of the moment. He looked up at the ceiling, at the small speaker nestled near the pipes. "Shut up," he hissed, but it was too late. The audio wasn't just going to the building. It was being fed directly into the live stream's audio buffer. I had overwritten the ghostly whispers and the distorted chorus. The 20,000 people watching the final cut were now hearing the raw, unedited voice of a jealous boyfriend in a basement. The chat window on the screen exploded. "Wait, who is Mark? Is this part of the script? He sounds like a normal guy. Look at the fake Elias. He's stopping." On the other laptop screen, the man in my apartment had frozen. The projection of my face on his mask flickered and glitched as he realized the audio didn't match his movements. The illusion was breaking. The live leak was becoming a real-life confession. "You're ruining it," Mark screamed, dropping the pretense of the slow cinematic walk. He lunged at me with a desperate, clumsy violence. I rolled to the side, kicking out at his shins. He stumbled, the knife skittering across the floor toward the rusted boiler. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the man-in-the-middle device and ripping it out of the wall. The basement plunged into total darkness as the laptop battery finally died. But I wasn't scared anymore. In the silence that followed, I heard something beautiful. Sirens. Not the digital sirens from a sound effect library. Real, physical sirens, screaming through the Seattle rain, getting closer with every second. The neighbors, the people I'd ignored for 2 years, had finally heard the emergency broadcast, and called the police. I felt my way through the dark, moving toward the stairs. I could hear Mark sobbing in the corner, a pathetic, wet sound. The director had lost his lead actor. I reached the ground floor just as the police battered down the front doors. The lobby was still filled with screens, but they were all dark now. The director kid was gone, his chair empty, his cables left behind like a molted skin. I walked out into the rain. The cold water felt incredible on my face. It felt real. I saw Clarice's car at the end of the block. The headlights were on, the engine idling. I watched as she pulled away, her tires screeching on the wet asphalt, disappearing into the gray mist of the city. The police found Mark in the basement. They found the replacement in my crawl space. They found the hours of footage, the scripts, the bids. But as I stood there, wrapped in a shock blanket while a detective took my statement, I looked at my phone. It had finally found a signal. A notification popped up. New comment on the reality of solitude. Just now. I opened it. The user was a new account, a name I didn't recognize. The ending was a bit messy, Elias, but don't worry. I've already started the next edit. I checked the hidden file on the kid's laptop one last time before the forensics team took it. That's when I knew he'd been here before. He wasn't just a fan. He was the one who had hired Mark and Clarice. And the worst part, he was still watching. Until I found the hidden file, I didn't realize that the final cut wasn't a video. It was a contract. The red and blue lights of the Seattle police cruisers bounced off the wet pavement of the alleyway, turning the rain into a flickering, chaotic strobe. I stood there, wrapped in a heavy, scratchy wool shock blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and old car seats. My hands were still shaking so hard that the hot coffee a first responder had pressed into them was sloshing over the rim, burning my knuckles. But I didn't care. The heat was the only thing that felt real. Everything else, the monitors, the masks, the scripts, felt like a fever dream that was finally breaking. I watched as two officers led Mark out of the building. He was still wearing that matte black jumpsuit, but the white plastic mask was gone. His face was pale, his eyes darting around with a mixture of confusion and a strange, lingering arrogance. He didn't look like a monster anymore. He just looked like a guy who had spent too much time in the dark, convinced that life was something you could direct. As he passed the ambulance where I was sitting, he stopped for a second. He didn't look at me with guilt. He looked at me with disappointment, as if I'd ruined a perfectly good take. The pacing was off, Elias, he muttered before the officer shoved him into the back of the car. You were supposed to stay in the basement. I didn't answer. There were no words left for him. I looked toward the front of the building, where another team of officers was bringing out the replacement, the guy from the crawl space. Without the projection of my face on his mask, he was a total stranger, a thin, nondescript man with hollow cheeks and a vacant expression. He looked like someone who had been erased long before he tried to erase me. They found him hiding in the ventilation shaft, still clutching a tablet that showed a live feed of my empty apartment. The detective in charge, a weary woman named Miller with a voice like gravel, stepped over to me. She was holding a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the director kid's laptop. We tracked the signal from the lobby, she said, her breath fogging in the cold night air. The kid is gone. He slipped out the back while you were in the basement, but he left his rig behind. My tech guys are already looking into it. It's not just a prank, detective, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. It was a contract. I saw the files. They weren't just stalking me. They were selling me. She nodded, her expression grim. We're seeing more of this. Digital squatting is the new term. They don't just steal your identity to open credit cards anymore. They steal your life to keep your brand going. Your subscribers, your sponsorships, your digital footprint. It's worth more than the cash in your wallet. To the world, you stay active. You keep posting, but it's someone else behind the keyboard. That was the realization that finally broke through the shock. The final cut wasn't about my death. It was about my disappearance. Clarice hadn't just wanted me gone. She wanted to profit from the void I left behind. She and Mark had planned to run my channel using the replacement, feeding the audience a scripted version of Elias while the real me was buried in a basement or worse. They had turned my solitude into a commodity. "We found your ex-girlfriend," Detective Miller continued, checking her notepad. "State Patrol picked her up at a rest stop near Olympia. She had a suitcase full of hard drives and a one-way ticket to Vancouver. She's being brought in for questioning now." I felt a strange sense of relief, but it was hollow. The people who had tried to destroy me were caught, but the world they had built around me was still there. Every screen in the city felt like a threat. Every notification on my phone felt like a hook. I looked at the dark windows of my apartment on the 3rd floor. I knew I could never go back there. I could never sit at that desk again, staring at the blue light, wondering if the flicker in the glass was a glitch or a guest. A week later, I left Seattle. I didn't pack much. I left the expensive monitors, the high-end cameras, and the ergonomic chair. I left the Elias that the world knew. I sold what I could, closed my accounts, and drove east. I didn't stop until the gray, rainy skyline of the Pacific Northwest was a memory in my rearview mirror. I ended up in a small town in northern Idaho, a place where the mountains are tall and the cell service is non-existent. I bought a small one-bedroom farmhouse at the end of a dirt road. It's an old place, built with thick timber and heavy stone. It has small windows that look out over a field of tall grass and a forest of pine. Most importantly, it has no internet connection. I work at a local hardware store now, stocking shelves and talking to people about real things. Drill bits, weather patterns, the price of lumber. My hands are calloused, and my eyes don't sting anymore. I don't edit videos. I don't look for the perfect transition. I live in the raw footage of every day, uncurated and unobserved. But the trauma of that night in Seattle hasn't entirely faded. Some habits are hard to break. I still triple-check the locks on my door every night. I still find myself looking at the reflection in the dark windows when the sun goes down, searching for a white mask or a flickering blue light. I don't own a computer, and my phone is a basic flip model that stays in a drawer most of the time. A few months ago, I received a letter in the mail, a real paper letter with a stamp and a handwritten address. It was from a lawyer in Seattle detailing the final outcome of the trial. Mark and Clarice had both taken plea deals. They're serving time for kidnapping and conspiracy. The director kid was never found, but his director cut device was linked to a dozen other cases across the country. He was just a middleman, a freelance producer for a dark web audience that hungers for authentic terror. The letter also included a small printed screenshot from my old YouTube channel. It had been taken down by the authorities, but someone had archived the last few seconds of the final cut stream. In the screenshot, the replacement is sitting at my desk. The projection of my face is perfectly aligned with his mask. He's looking directly into the camera, and he's holding up a small handwritten sign. It says, "Thanks for watching. The next episode starts soon." I burned the letter in my wood-burning stove. I watched the paper curl and turn to ash, the image of my own face disappearing into the flames. I know that out there, in the digital world I left behind, there are people still looking for me. There are algorithms that miss my data. There are directors looking for their next lead actor, but they won't find me here. I've deleted my history. I've wiped the drive. Sometimes when I'm walking back to my house from the store, I see a drone flying high above the tree line. Its red and green lights blink against the twilight sky, a small, buzzing reminder of the world that looks both ways. I don't run. I don't hide. I just keep walking, because I've learned the most important lesson of the digital age. The only way to truly be safe is to be invisible. The internet is a window, and for a long time, I thought I was the one looking out. I didn't realize that the window was two-way, and the thing looking in was much hungrier than I was. If you're listening to this, do me a favor. Look at the glass behind you. Not the reflection, but the glass itself. If you see a smudge, or a flicker, or a shape that doesn't belong, don't try to edit it out. Don't try to rationalize it. Just walk away, turn off the screen, lock the door, and go outside. Because once they start the edit, they never stop until the credits roll. If you've ever felt like your digital life was becoming a cage, let me know in the comments. Or better yet, don't. Just close the tab and go talk to a neighbor. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the things that hide in the light of your monitor. But remember, the more connected you are, the easier you are to find. Stay safe, stay analog, and never trust the reflection in the rain. I never found out who the director was, and I hope I never do. That's why I don't sleep without a physical bar across my door anymore. If something feels wrong, trust that it is. The internet is a window that looks both ways. Good night, and keep your eyes on the world, not the screen.